Hello there, cartoonists and cartoon lovers. Welcome to the Cartoon Pad. I'm Bob Eckstein, and we have Michael Shore on my side.
Hi, Bob.
And our loyal producer Marty is here, and we're going to talk about cartoons and how the sausage is made. We got an exciting guest lined up, and I want to thank our the show band 11 Acorn Lane for our theme song. And we do have a guest in the studio waiting, so we're going to keep it brief. But Michael, we're going to just exchange some pleasantries. Michael, how are you doing?
There's always a first time. I'm fine, Bob. How are you?
Good. I'll mention that I've been working on 3D cartoons. That's what I was working on today. I'm working with a software company, and together we've been working on these cartoons that are 3D. And just wondering, at what point are we going to be in our own cartoons?
I'm working on 4D cartoons with actually holograms where you insert yourself.
Are they scratch and sniff?
Yeah, they just insert only, please.
Okay. Well, on that note, I say we bring on our guest who's waiting very patiently. We're very excited to have him. This week's guest is at the top of his game as a cartoonist, an illustrator, stand-up, an actor. Brace yourself for this big resume. He's a writer and artist for Australia's most popular comic strip, Ginger and Megs, which appears in 120 newspapers in 34 countries. His gag cartoons appear in the New Yorker, Mad, and magazines around the world. And he's also president of the National Cartoonist Society and is the youngest ever. He's 14. Our guest performs stand-up across the country, has performed and produced shows at the Melbourne International Comedy Festival, and he's one of the stars of the Food Network, and he's in numerous TV commercials. Welcome, Jason Chatfield.
Yikes. Do you want to be my new agent? That was fantastic.
Jason, what else did you accomplish during that introduction?
Just while you were doing that, I produced my own series on Netflix.
Well, it's great having you here. We're really glad you can make it. And let me first ask you just how are you doing? Because we've both had COVID, and we both shared that we had some lingering symptoms.
Yeah, you were actually one of the only people I knew who had it, and I took great solace in knowing that there was someone I could actually talk to about it, because you got it not early, but not late. Like you got it at a time when we didn't know a lot about the COVID hangover. We didn't know that much about the onset of symptoms. And I remember emailing you when you had it and when you were getting over it and really trying to figure it out, because it's like a jigsaw puzzle in the dark, really. And yeah, I've still got my lung capacity is still a nightmare, but
Do you have any other lingering symptoms? Are you funnier or?
That would imply I was funny to begin with. I have the brain fog for sure. I definitely have that, whatever that thing is that they keep talking about. I definitely have it, as if I didn't already. I think, yeah, there's lots of different things, just, extra sensitive allergies now. My wife had it as well, and now she's got new allergies that she never had before. Her immune system's playing up a bit. There's all sorts of little things, little tricks. It's the gift that keeps on giving.
It seems to have affected your accent too. You used to have a Brooklyn accent.
Yeah, but then you said action, and I just, I figured you'd want some kind of exotic. As Sam said, it's, what is it? Like a Columbus, Ohio, or Cincinnati accent or something like that.
I've lived in Cincinnati for many years, so.
Did you guys?
At the time of Jim Bogman, yeah.
Oh, yeah, good old Jim. I've met him. He's in Colorado now, doing zits.
He did move to Colorado. Yep.
Did you guys hear about the woman who woke up after a few weeks with a different accent?
Oh yeah, wasn't that like a brain thing? Like, then every few books I read, there's a reference to this story of a woman who woke up with a different accent completely, but it was totally authentic, and she was it wasn't bipolar, it was a brain thing. It was some kind of the thing between the brain that connects them or something. What was the story there, Bob?
There was the man that mistaken his wife for a hat. And
I remember that one.
Yeah, and the hat was not happy about it. I can just tell you that.
That one was for life insurance. That was
okay.
different.
Well, have you resumed doing any stand-up in the clubs yet?
I'm afraid I have. I went back as soon as I possibly could, much to the chagrin of my doctor. It's a compulsion. I think I've spoken to you about this before. It's like that's like being an alcoholic or something. I don't know. It's just, I can't not do it. And I was doing Zoom shows during the pandemic. I was doing outdoor shows in parks and arena, like Greek theater style outdoor shows. Because I get very, I start jonesing if I can't do a set. So I have just started doing clubs again. I'm doing my second show. I've been doing bar shows and things like that, but and they're all socially distanced and they're all outdoors in outdoor beer gardens. But there is one club that I did, the Comic Strip Live, which I'm glad is still around because my home club of Dangerfields unfortunately died during the pandemic. So I'm up for my second show there in a week or so for sort of an audition, I guess, to get on their roster, which would be nice.
Jason, do you incorporate cartoons into your set? I mean, as a instructional device?
Not as an instructional device. I did do a show called Stand Up Comic Strip Live back in 2012, 13. And it was basically me doing comedy on stage. And then I would draw a character on like an easel that I'd be telling the story, drawing the character while I'm talking. And then I kind of pre-animated the eyes and the mouth, the pupils in the mouth, and then I would have someone off stage who had everything queued up, and I would sort of push a button, and the thing would come to life. And
it's like Winsor McKay and Gertie the dinosaur,
right?
Except was there?
Yes, it's like a high-tech version of that.
Exactly.
Yeah, it was, and so that did well, and then I tried it again here in New York. In Astoria, was Long Island City. I did a show, QED, Astoria. Yeah, I did a version of it here, just sort of as a proof of concept. So I do use it for one-man show style things, but I tried doing it for sets when I first moved here. I tried it at the Creek and the Cave, Long Island City, and it's so cumbersome.
That's somewhere in Central Park,
so I just,
isn't it?
Yeah. Long Island City,
Creek in the Cave,
and that has also not survived.
So to cross-pollinate platforms, weren't you on Talkword and talked about shoving your golden book of ideas into the loo? I remember that one. It was memorable.
The wonderful cross-promoting Talkword podcast with Marty Dundex at the Weekly Humorist. Yes, I had a lot of fun. I think. All right, so that's a very true story.
That's worth telling again, and it's better than Bob's questions.
That's not at all true. He's a very good interviewer.
Okay.
If you want me to tell the story, I can give you the abridged version, which is that I moved from Australia to America after 7 years of doing stand-up, and I tried doing my old stuff, and it just wasn't really working. And even if I slightly tweaked it, it didn't really work because people laugh at different things in Australia, and there's a different rhythm, a different style of comedy in Australia. Even though we all speak English, there is a cultural difference, and we're not all Jim Jeffries. So we had a moment where I was sitting in the lobby of I guess it was like a hotel bar on Ludlow Street, and I said to my wife, Sophie, I was like, none of this crap works. And it was a book that I had been carrying with me for 7 years, every joke I'd ever written. And I thought after a couple of drinks, I thought I'd be very ceremonious about it, very, very profound.
Yes.
And I walked downstairs to the bathrooms and I tore up all the pages out of the book, threw them in the toilet, and I flushed them. And if you heard the material, that's exactly where it belonged.
It didn't go.
But unfortunately, the water started swirling and then going purple from the ink and then overflowing and then I broke the toilet, and it never really. I mean, it was a fitting end to terrible
I
material,
still
but I
love that
started again
story.
after that.
It sort of reminds me of Train Spotting, where you should have climbed in the toilet after it. I mean, that would have been.
I did not. Yeah, okay. I did not choose life. I chose comedy.
That's good.
But so
Bob's confused.
Yeah,
come on, Bob.
Bob, yeah.
I want to ask you how you got from growing up in the Outback. I mean, you really were in the Outback. I mean, I mentioned this to you before. You have the bugs the size of English muffins, and it's 120 in the shade. I don't even know how hot it really got. You had no culture, but a few Midnight Oil albums.
Yes, blooming onions 3 times a day.
Oh my God!
Did this all toughen you up for the gag cartoon landscape?
Yeah, it was a desert island. I was living on a desert island, Bob. That's how I got my. That's
all you had was a case of Marmite.
Oh my God. Marmite is for expat British people. That's Vegemite is the
Vegemite. I get those two confused. Though
national sport. Australia is a very interesting place in relation to. It's a good place to make a lot of mistakes while no one's looking. Does that make sense? Sort of, you can really hone your craft there, and there not be any real. I don't know. I guess if you fail and you try things, and there's not that many people noticing. So by the time you get to bring your stuff to market, you've had some time to experiment and try things and figure out what your style is. And
what caused the leap to New York from Australia?
I always have a different answer to this question, but today
I was going to assume a woman.
No, it's just it's New York. What's not to love here? I mean, it's the greatest city on earth, and I have to say, so my wife and I met in Australia. She was a comedian when we met. We were both doing the Melbourne International Comedy Festival when we met. She is smarter than me, so she stopped doing comedy. And we both moved here because, we'd been living in Melbourne for a number of years, and I had moved there from Perth. She had moved there from Sydney. And, we just thought we don't have any pets or kids or debts or anything. Like, if we're going to live abroad, we may as well do it now. And so we thought, what do we got to lose? So we did it, and we're still here 7 years later.
Well, congratulations. I mean, you've done so much. It's pretty amazing. And you have a new book coming out. The new book is commemorative of well, I'll let you describe this comic strip that's legendary in your hometown.
Well, Australia, as I said, it's an interesting place because it's kind of a closed circuit in many ways. And Ginger Meggs has been around since 1921. I took it over about 14 years ago in 2007. It's a kind of like an Australian version of Dennis the Menace, but it predates Dennis by about 30-odd years, 36 years. He's this sort of larrikin kid, like muckabout, always gets into trouble kid, but with a heart of gold. He's a red-headed kid, and he started in the newspapers just as a Sunday strip, as a supporting character back in 1921 in another comic strip, in much the same as Nancy or Crazy Cat, and then eventually became his own comic character called Ginger Meggs, and it's the 100th anniversary this year because November 13th, 2021 is 100 years since he first appeared. So we got a book with Penguin Random House and a bunch of other things that are sort of slowly being released across the year to celebrate the centenary. And it's been an interesting thing. I've never really done a full-on book before, much less had to promote a book. So I'm, learning about how much of doing a book is about trying to get pre-sales and numbers and marketing and interviews. And you are, Bob, my book guru on the mount. You've done more books than I've had hot meals.
No,
So I
try to
do.
work a snowman into it. You'll be fine.
No, I have a lot of respect for anyone who's done a book, let alone a slew of books, because it's tough.
So
It's tough
the
stuff.
book is actually a novelization. It's not really a anthology. So you've
No,
created...
they've already been plenty of anthologies done over the years, and they're very collectible. But we wanted to kind of look to the future, not the past, on this one. As I say, there's plenty of anthologies if people enjoy the old stuff. But we wanted to kind of use the opportunity of the 100th to kind of show that, you know, he's just as relevant today as he was back then.
He's a little like a Doctor Who. He reincarnates instead of just like instead of existing. And it's like Dennis the Menace is doing the same crap he's been doing for 80 years,
right?
And he's never going to change. And
that's a good analogy, Doctor Who. Yeah, he regenerates. He's new with, you know, each new actor is like the new artist. There have been 5 artists in the last 100 years for Ginger Meggs, 5 cartoonists, I should say, because they write and draw it. And yeah, you know, it's an interesting thing. It became kind of an Australian icon because, you know, he just kind of ended up typifying what it was to be an Aussie kid growing up in Australia, and he sort of accidentally captured the zeitgeist of each decade in Australia over the 100 years. So it's become this weird little
I like this quote I found from John Curtin, the Australian Prime Minister. Ginger Meggs is Australia's Peter Pan. Most of us can recognize him in our own youth, but unlike him, we had to grow up. What? It's kind of a buzzkill there at the end.
Well, he was Australia's wartime prime minister in World War II. And he died soon after he said that. He was in a bad mood.
Yeah, he seemed a little cranky. It seemed like a cranky quote. Well, it's interesting. A lot of legacy comic strips just kind of get stuck. And a lot of the artists that take it over don't even get their name on the strip. So
that's true.
You've been given, you were given the keys to the kingdom. I congratulate you.
It wasn't easy, but I must admit I was very grateful to have the opportunity, because my predecessor on the strip, James Kemsley, he put my name forward to the family of the creator to get them to sign off on me. And I was 23, so I was doing political cartoons in Perth. I wasn't a comic strip cartoonist, so I had to learn how to do it on the fly, because unfortunately a few days after he asked me to take it over, he died of motor neuron disease. And so it was one of those real sort of bittersweet, ways to inherit a big...
Yeah, I was saying you seem way too young, healthy, and cheerful to be a comic strip cartoonist, because they're usually a pretty tortured bunch.
Yeah, I know. I hang out
historically, I don't know. Maybe they're all healthy now and living, wholesome lives.
You mentioned my being president of the National Cartoonist Society earlier, and I don't know if that was on air or not, but
it is
hang
now.
out with cartoonists and comic strip and gag cartoonists and comic strip cartoonists, and we're a very specific breed of human, and I think we all have the same sort of makeup. Our brain is kind of wired the same way. It's like when comics meet each other in a room full of what they call civilians. They just go, "Oh my god, a comedian!" We're all sick in the head.
Jason, I wanted to ask you about the sayings that I see in the cartoons of this strip. Mm-hmm. What is the meaning behind that? How did that come about?
Well, my predecessor on the strip, James Kemsley, was really in charge of turning the strip from a Sunday strip into a daily. And he did that in the 80s and the early 90s. And he kind of wanted to have a little extra thing. Initially, it started as just like he would write it on a fence in the background or a wall, like Kilroy or something, like a little saying or a little drawing, graffiti. We call them graffiti. And the readers really, really enjoyed reacting. They would write in and say, "Oh my God, I love those little things." And there's something about like Pat Oliphant hiding a little pig in his cartoons saying something, or having to look for something in a cartoon as well as being able to read the strip, like Bizarro. Has the all those little things you can
Oh,
find in
Jason,
the
I can
panel.
see Nina in your hair right now, by the way.
Nice. Exactly. So that's a perfect example. The Hirschfeld Ninas is what graffiti is to
everyone looks for
Ginger Megs, except you don't have to look very hard to find them. And he left me a gigantic folder full of them that I still haven't gotten through.
Are they evergreen? I mean, are they dated?
I think most of them are evergreen. There's some that have turned a bit because just culture's changed and comedy's changed a little bit. I think as Seinfeld said, what is actually funny changes roughly every 20 years. Just culturally speaking, like little gags that you're like, yeah, you can't really say that anymore. But most of it's pretty evergreen stuff. They're like philosophical little things. And apparently, according to Kensley, it was something like 40-60. 40% of the readers would read it for the graffiti, and then 60% would read it for the actual strip. So not bad odds.
Oh, so have you written your own yet, or they've all been already pre-written?
You can usually tell the ones that I've written because they're sort of in my comic voice.
Okay.
So yeah, they're peppered in there. My ones are peppered in there among the ones from the folder. And as I said, the folder's very old, and I don't know where he had, he was this, Kemsley was this real powerhouse. He did everything, and he was also the president of the Australian Cartoonist Association. That's when I met him. So, and he had all these other things going on. So
I think he's possessed you.
mentor.
I think he actually, his essence was transferred into you by some strange, happenstance.
Yeah, I mean,
sounds
Jason.
like it.
Yeah, Jason, you can't
Freaky Friday.
you can't throw stones about heavy schedules. I mean, you actually have a podcast called "There Is Something in This." Now, is that going to continue, or has that ended because of the pandemic?
So I can give you the exclusive here, Bob.
Oh, do
we're
go
bringing
on.
it back. We're getting the band back together. I'm actually meeting Scott right after this to discuss it because there's an exciting new development on that front. We started that podcast as it was very organic. Scott, my co-host on the podcast, his name's Scott Dooley, fellow expat Australian comedian and comedy writer. He and I would catch up on Mondays for a beer, just routinely, just to catch up. And, he would sort of pitch ideas for like stand-up bits, and I would do the same. And, comics help each other punch up each other's material, add tags, or just, different angles and stuff like that. And so we'd do that. And then once in a while, because the bar we went to had a New Yorker subscription, we'd flip open the New Yorker and go, that's pretty good. That's good. That one's pretty good. And then he would go, hey, is this a good idea is there something in this? Is this an idea for a cartoon? And we would do that we did it for long enough that eventually his radio brain kicked in, his background's in radio. And he was like, this would actually make a pretty good podcast. And I swore, and I said, every comedian has a friggin' podcast. Like the world doesn't need another podcast. But yeah, we did one as like a proof of concept, and it went really well and kind of took off. He was right. He's got good instincts on this stuff. And we did a bunch of episodes and then live podcasts. We got some celebrity guests, like Ronnie Cheng and Roy Wood Jr. from The Daily Show. We got the great Bob Mankoff, who I hope will be one of your guests on this show at some point. But yeah, we got a lot of really interesting feedback on it, and we would involve the listeners and sort of get them to suggest cartoon ideas and see if we could punch them up and make them workable, just for fun. And the cartoon ideas that we came up with on the podcast ended up getting into the magazine and in the New Yorker for the daily cartoons. Sometimes they showed up in Mad Magazine or the Weekly Humorist, or all over the place. So it was really fun, kind of to basically just open the door to.
Did you send them honorariums or? Hey, thanks. Thanks a lot. I think that's crowdsourcing at its best.
It's weird because we never ended up getting any of the listener suggestions published at all, and we really were kind of hoping that we could get one of them to work, but we just never really. I guess we never did enough work.
An object lesson for everyone. Don't try this at home,
Yeah.
kids.
Caption competition. Yeah.
So I have a question. When you switch between your comic strip hat and your gag cartoon hat, is it a difficult switch back and forth, especially when you have such a specific voice for Ginger as opposed to, a New Yorker gag cartoon that could be almost anything? Or
yes, I mean the old thing of just write for your audience is that is true. So the newspaper audience for Ginger Megs is 40 to 80, and the gag cartoons in the New Yorker are a totally different demographic.
It's 80 to 100.
80 to 100, I think, is the current one in the Upper West Side. But it's one of those weird sort of things where you have to recalibrate. So I write in different rooms of the house and sometimes different places in New York.
So did John
to try
Updike.
and separate it out. Oh, is that a John Updike thing?
Yeah, he would go from room to room depending on what he was working on.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Well, there's definitely something in that, because there's something in going to a place to do a thing, because you recalibrate, you reset your brain when you go into the new space. So I write, this is going to sound very silly, but I write in the bath. So
I read that somewhere. I heard that on Marty's. That was fascinating. Don't you get pruny?
It was by accident. I have a little, like a bath caddy thing, and it has like almost like a drawing board thing. And I don't bring a phone or a laptop in there. It's just a yellow legal pad, and I just sit in there, and I close the curtain too, because it just creates this little cocoon of sort of closed off space, and your brain just does something where it just goes, all right, you're in the Ginger Megs universe now. So you just picture yourself in that world, and you write for that voice. And then when I'm doing gag cartoons, they come to you, you know what it's like, is they come to you at all hours of the night and day, and you've got to be ready to write them down and capture them when they pop up and when you're walking.
Well, Bob writes on the roof. Did you tell Jason about your office?
No.
Is that what those scribbles on your ceiling are, Bob?
No, actually, I do work outside on the roof of my house. But I actually learned a lot from you, because you have a blog and you talk about this. And I'm sure a lot of people knew that you work in the bath, but you also share these other tips, which I in turn have shared with my students. A really good, very constructive advice, which I followed some of it before, but some of it was new, such as your to-do list. And it's a great tip that you could repeat right now in a moment, because it's worth repeating, definitely. And that is, you don't do everything by just a list, but you have a time. You schedule out everything.
Yeah, I don't work from a to-do list. I used to do that for forever. I've been freelance for nearly 20 years-ish, and I basically used to just have this big, long list, ever-growing list of things to do, and it would be crippling because I didn't know what to start on. I didn't know when to do what. I didn't know what was going to take what amount of time. So I'd constantly be battling deadlines and figuring out, what do I even do? It was like I said, it was crippling. So I realized very quickly, if I had 365 comic strips to do per year, plus gag cartoons, plus at the time I was doing editorial cartoons for the newspapers and commissions, I was like, I'm going to have to figure out how to fit this all in. And then I was doing stand-up at night, which is a nighttime sport. There's no stand-up during the day. And it just sort of forces you to figure out, all right, what's the best way to do this and still build in gaps in your schedule to allow for dead time, for downtime. So I block everything out in the calendar. I color code it. And if you Google work from a calendar, not a to-do list, my article will probably come up where I actually show pictures of how it looks. Because that's something that really helped me as a freelancer, especially when you're shifting gears from if you do your most creative work in the morning, then assign a lot of that stuff for the first 3 hours of your day. or if you know you're going to be doing emails and admin and invoicing and all that crap, you bundle that together at a certain time, but you copy and paste how long it took the previous time, and then you know exactly how long it's actually going to take. And that was a big revelation to me, was actually not thinking, oh, that'll take 30 minutes. And then 2 hours later, you're like, crap, this invoicing's taking forever. So yeah, there's certain little tips that you learn as a freelancer when you have to be a self-starter, and you have projects that have deadlines, and no one else is writing you. There's no boss over your shoulder saying, hey, good work, where's those TPS reports?
How far, Jason,
thing.
how far in advance do you develop the strip typically?
I'm 6 weeks ahead with dailies and 8 weeks with Sundays.
Do you submit you're syndicated, so is it still out of Kansas City?
It is, yeah. Andrews McMeel syndication. They have a great editor that they gave me called Josh. Actually, it's interesting. So Josh Perez is his name. I never had an editor for the first, I want to say 8 years doing the strip. So I was just flying blind. I didn't know how it was being translated, because it gets translated into Spanish and French and all sorts of stuff. And then finally I got some guidance, and they've been awesome. Yeah. The team at Andrews McMeel have been fantastic. So I work ahead on the strip. They have to translate it and get it all laid out in all the newspapers. So I think that's the closest you can fly to the sun, is I think it's about 3 weeks is the closest you can fly to the sun on that. But I've known of people to work up to 2 weeks. I think I heard Patrick McDonald at one point say he was 2 weeks out, and I'm like, oh my God, that's like running from an active volcano while it's
that's like the train is catching up with you.
Yeah, I couldn't do that. Yeah, I wish I had
Were you able to catch up a bit though during the pandemic? Because of the pandemic, you couldn't do as many stand-ups. Did it kind of give you a breather a little bit?
No, and I've spoken to other friends of mine who were creatives, working creative fields, about this. I thought that the extra time that I had would yield extra productivity, but it didn't. I actually hit a slump. I had a real creative slump, and I was talking to an author friend of mine, and she had to push back the release dates of her books because she was like, I just can't. I know I've got all this time, and I'm sitting around at home, and I've been working from home forever. But all of a sudden, for whatever reason, knowing that the quarantine is imposed, all of a sudden my brain's doing something different to me, and my creative slump has just consumed me. And I had the same. I really struggled.
Wow. Maybe everyone gave themselves a subconscious timeout.
Well,
maybe.
Well, Jason had a lot happen to him in the past year. And I don't know if you want to get into this, but what didn't happen to you?
Well, I didn't die. No, that's for sure.
But your agent unfortunately passed away, and you had to deal with that.
Yeah, it's been an interesting and surreal year for everyone, but certainly not being able to, because we're in Manhattan. My wife and I were living in Alphabet City for the past 7 years, and that is a neighborhood that very, very rapidly declined and sort of regressed to its old 90s era style of things. And we both caught the coronavirus pretty early on in March, April. And not a lot was known about it back then. And we were kind of caught. We thought we got out before things really picked up in New York. And unfortunately, we caught it in St. Louis, of all places, in an airport. So we, because that's the only place we were around people. Otherwise, we were completely isolated. And we were in an empty Airbnb, and we both got it really bad. And I didn't know what the onset of symptoms was, because every time I Googled it, it would be something different. So I drew it. I just drew every day what I was experiencing, and then I published it online so that anyone who got the virus could at least go, well, hey, maybe that'll be a thing. Maybe I should stock up on painkillers and toilet paper. But yeah, so it was that happened, and then my wife got it, obviously, and then we were stranded for a while. Came back to New York eventually, and yeah, we had friends who died, and my agent was one of them. We were close. He was a good friend. He was a rare agent because it really, some agents, I've got a lot of friends who are actors and comedians who are just like, my agent's a piece of crap, and this guy was good. He'd show up on set and, hang out with you in the green room and just check if everything was okay, if you had everything you needed, if you were happy with the way the production was going. He doubled my money on everything I booked. He was a really good agent, and unfortunately he caught COVID-19 and was hospitalized, and it was a pretty protracted hospital battle, and he passed away in March. So that was tough. And yeah, my default when bad things happen is to make jokes. That's what I've always done my whole life. But that one was really tough. I couldn't really pull myself out of that one.
Well, our condolences. We really feel for you. It's terrible. And
thanks. Yeah.
Let me ask you. Let's switch it to something happy that happened during the pandemic. You did have an interesting run-in with a comedian in a club. Would you mind sharing a highlight of the pandemic?
What specifically are you talking about there? You're being very, very cagey about all these leading questions.
Yeah, Mr. Chris Rock is someone you ran into one night.
Oh, I thought it was Milton Berle. Ah, heck.
Yeah, I think Henny Youngman was. I obviously, like I said, I can't not do comedy, or at the very least be part of it and watch it. And the best comedy club in the world is the Comedy Cellar. And before they were technically reopened to do shows in their basement or the Village Underground or the Fat Black Pussycat Lounge around on 3rd Street, they were doing shows up in the Olive Tree Cafe, which no one knew. We were just showing up there. I would go there with a friend and have dinner and like a drink and just sort of hang out and talk shop. And then, Liz, the manager, would come over and go, "Hey, we're doing a show. It's kind of like a mic, basically comedians performing for the other comedians at the comics table at the other end of the room. But hey, if you guys want to stick around, you're welcome to stay." And there were 4 of us. And then halfway through, one guy came in, he wandered in off McDougal Street, ordered some nachos. And so there's 5 of us sitting there watching comedian after comedian. And these are the best comedians in the city. The Comedy Cellar is as high quality as you can get. And we're just watching and everyone's doing great. And then Daniel Simonson, who's a really funny, I think he's a Norwegian comedian. He was on there, and then the waitress walked up and handed him a little slip of paper, which is always code in Comedy Cellar for, someone big's dropping in, like Jerry's dropping in or Louis or someone. So sure enough, Daniel said, "Oh, all right, I'm going to bring on your next comedian. It's Chris Rock." And everyone kind of looked at each other like, "Wait, what? Where is he?" And he was wearing this big puffy jacket with clear rimmed eyeglasses, big glasses. I honestly didn't recognize him. And he did 25 minutes of brand new stuff, right off his phone, just ideas that he'd been thinking about throughout the pandemic. And he's just to watch someone like that just work stuff out. And he just bombed for 20 minutes, and then he just hit something in about minute 21, and it killed. It was amazing. He just found this nugget of gold. He was sifting through. He found this nugget of gold, and then just started Chris Rocking it. He just finds a premise and then just tears it to shreds. It's awesome. And I was gasping for it. I'd never laughed so hard. And it was and there were 5 of us. He was doing it for 5 of us. And in a restaurant in McDougal Street. And so I looked at my friend, he's a comedian. I looked over and I was like, "Can you believe what is happening right now? This is just, it's not like a drop-in at the Cellar. Drop-ins happen at the Cellar all the time. Comics, big celebrity comedians drop in every night. But Chris Rock doesn't show up upstairs at the restaurant to do an open mic for 20 minutes. That never happens. And yeah, it was surreal and awesome. And it just completely reignited my enthusiasm for getting back out there and writing new material, which I've since done. Thank God.
That's great. Jason, how tempting is it for the other comedians to want to chime in and sort of workshop someone else's material? Or is that what's the etiquette for that? Like, what would be appropriate and not appropriate?
I actually, so unless you're a comic and they know you're a comic and they already kind of know you, it's kind of weird to go up to another comic and go, hey, I've got a tag for that bit. It's okay, but it's kind of strange. So unless you're also passed at the same club, like for instance, if you're at the Comedy Cellar, you're going to be hanging out at the table, which is right in the corner near the bar. The table's kind of got this mythic, weird thing to it where to sit at that table, you have to have earned it. You know, it's a pretty big deal. And if you're a comic at that table and you have a tag or a different punchline or a different angle for a joke, you can pitch it to someone else at the table. But if some schlub walks up to the table and goes, hey guys, I loved your show. Hey, I got a good joke I know you were talking about Denmark. Boy, I got a good joke for Denmark. You can't really, you're going to go, thank you, sir.
I love that
I'm glad
guy.
You like the show. That's right, but that's
so you can't hold up a scorecard. You can't go like 7.5.
That's the guy that Michael gets his captions from.
He's sick burn there, Michael.
That's all right. So yeah, does the allure of stand-up pull you away from other things? Because that seems to like really create a lot of energy, for you personally.
Yeah, I don't know. It's like I said, it's a nighttime sport. There's no comedy during the day. It's, you can write jokes and you can work on them and you can listen back to your set and revise things and punch up some bits. But
okay,
you can't really, yeah.
So you forego sleep, or I mean,
no, I sleep. I sleep pretty well.
Wow,
like I said, my schedule is
impressed.
kind of all blocked out in the calendar, and I'm pretty rigid about it these days.
I'm picturing you just collapsing at the end of the day, just out like a light. I mean, we didn't really talk about the other things you do because, I mean, you go out for auditions.
Yeah, well, that was part of Sandy, but my agent, he would just send me out for stuff. And some of it, I was like, I'm not getting this. This is ridiculous. And then I'd kind of go in and flub the audition, and they're the ones I would book. And then the ones I really wanted, like the commercial for, Progressive. I was trying to be the next.
Oh man, you worked with Flo?
I wish. If I did that, I could buy this entire building. But unfortunately, I was the face of dandruff, sell some glue, and
you do have nice hair.
Well, I got free shampoo for life. And then what was New Jersey Lottery was one I shot recently in quarantine. That was a complicated shoot with like little animated characters.
Yeah.
And I like voiceover work. Like I did TV in the pandemic as well. I did a show on Food Network that you mentioned. That was fun. I just got to be me, just hosting a show. But I kind of prefer voice work because it's the perfect crime, because you get to do all the silly voices and you get to act kind of, you get to perform, but no one has to see your face. You can walk down the street and people don't go, hey, it's that dandruff guy. And you also get to do comedy, and it pays well. Voice work pays pretty well. So that would, booking something like that, like a voice on a cartoon animated series would be kind of cool, because you get to do everything without having to be on set all the time and in front of a camera and have to, do your hair.
Maybe they can segue the Geico lizard to Australia and from British. Then you're set.
And Jason,
I did audition for that.
Or you could be this Australian cousin. Go ahead and pitch that. That would be nice.
It wouldn't be a gecko. It would be a frill-necked lizard.
Frill-neck. Driving a Holden instead of an Austin.
Jason, I like seeing your face.
Certainly not a Subaru Outback. I'm sorry, Bob, what were you saying?
I was saying, I like seeing your face. I see you. I'll always remember you as the demo guy. The guy who comes into your bathroom and says, no demo. I I crack up every time I see that commercial. I have it on, I recorded it. And it's just
That's
rewind,
funny.
replay. I just can't get enough.
Bob has deep
Yeah.
infatuations. So
Bath Fitter is we had to do that. We had to shoot that commercial in French and English because they're a Canadian company.
oh
And
my.
I am not good at French.
Can you just, for my sake, can we hear a bit?
No demo.
Oh my God, you're a natural, man. You are.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate that. Thank you. Yeah, I'd like to thank the Academy. Jesus. Yes, thank you very much.
Yes, Lou.
Do you have to change your accent for all the different commercial work? Do you find your,
Mhm.
yeah.
I do, but I'm terrible at it. I don't have a good generic accent. It slips all the time. Because I never really had a very strong Australian accent to begin with back home, and people here sometimes confuse it for British or South African or whatever. But yeah, I have like the New Jersey, what do you call it? The New Jersey Lottery commercial, the Cells Blue commercial, the Barfooters commercial. I'm technically doing an American accent, but if you listen to it, it's dreadful. You can tell it's not. You can tell I have an Australian accent. So that's not my strong suit. But I have to, yeah. They say, hey, well, do it in American. And I'm like, all right, it's your,
that sounds very American. That was
yeah,
very American.
you can switch it on and off for.
Just hold your nose when you talk. You'll be fine.
Right, sure. Hold your nose.
There
as
you
soon
go.
as you start talking, you curl your R's.
It's like no one knows Hugh Laurie is actually British. Unless
which is weird to me because he's iconic. He's an iconic.
Yes, unless
British
you watch
Wooster
and Jeeves.
Fry and Laurie. Yeah.
Or Fry and Laurie.
He's a genius. I just worked with his ex personal manager assistant person, and she said he was the greatest person in the world to work with. He was the most multi-talented. He's a musician, good singer.
It's like
obviously known for house.
I can't remember his name. The Mentalist.
Simon Baker, isn't Australian?
Simon Patrick Jane, right? And then he would do the lead-in for. He goes, "Hello, we'll be right back in a moment," and you knew it was Patrick Jane talking. But I mean, what's his first name?
Simon
Baker. Yes. So
yeah, we're like the Skrulls in the Marvel universe. We're all just sort of insidiously inserting ourselves into your world and don't know that we're Australian until we pop up on late night and Stephen Colbert interviews us and we have an accent all of a sudden. It's there's someone I know who's on a show called Succession, which I really like the show. I think it's a great show. It's on HBO, and her name's Sarah Snook, and she plays Shiv. She plays the daughter in the show, and she is as Aussie as they come. She's like, "G'day, how you going?" And then you watch the show, and she has the best American. Like you can't even get a hint of Australian in it. It's perfect. She has a pitch perfect Australian accent, American accent, and it's like her character and the whole thing is just she's unreal. And you would, if you heard her speak, you would not believe it.
Yeah, there's so many which American accent are we talking about? Like generic, suburban, kind of someone from nowhere accent.
Yeah, I call it generican. That's a term that
Generican's good. I like that.
Well, it's because it's a mix. It's got a bit of Californian, a bit of Midwestern. It's got some East Coast. There's no Boston in there, even though I sort of, don't pronounce my R's. And there's a touch of sort of a little bit of Kentucky or Missouri once in a while in there. So it's kind of this mishmash that becomes this generic and it's almost like, how in the UK they have received pronunciation, which is everything you hear on the BBC every day. They all sound exactly the same. If America had that, it would be the broadcast journalism school accent. And that kind of did you go to journalism school, Michael? You said you studied journalism?
I went to the University of Missouri, the J school,
right. Right. Did they teach that there? Did they teach what it?
No, I was a copywriter. I was majoring in advertising, but it was really funny because all these people would come from all over to be in the J school for broadcast. And the woman one of the teachers, she was a professional journalist, but she was from New Orleans. And she had this really funky accent.
Mm-hmm.
And she goes, yesterday, wild horses got out. I go, houses? No, not houses, horses. Horses. Yeah, that's what I said, horses. So anyway.
That's me every day, just trying to order a bacon, egg, and cheese. It's a nightmare.
You're doing fine. You don't look so sick.
You're doing okay.
Yeah, Jason, you're also the president of the NCS, National Cartoon Society. Yes. What news you have for us? Got anything you want to share? What's going on and what's happening with the Rubens?
Yeah, I'm in my second term now because my first term was spent indoors, and we've been basically trying to adapt the NCS to the industry, which is rapidly changed. It's always rapidly changing, but more so than ever recently. So we're rewriting the bylaws to sort of adapt to allow for cartoonists who make their living as cartoonists and haven't, had a drop of ink on a piece of newsprint. And that it's such the organization started in 1946, so the bylaws are very old, and we're also doing a virtual, as we did last year, a virtual NCS Fest sort of Rubens weekend this year, because we polled all of the members and asked if they would feel safe coming to an in-person Rubens, and the resounding answer was no, which is totally understandable.
I never felt safe. Yeah. So I never felt safe going. I've been,
That's just because of Sergio. He's too charming.
Are they going to redesign the Goldberg Award, the Rubin Award? It looks like an unspeakable act of depravity.
Yeah, 2 guys, 1 pen. Well, it's an interesting design because we had to get a new mold made this year, and the mold maker was like, what is it meant to look like? And we're like, you know what, we're going to have to go back into the archives because I don't know anymore. It's a weapon. It looks like a weapon or something you would kill someone with in Cluedo.
Well, Jason, who's the host this year?
That's a massive secret. That's a big secret. We're doing something very special this year. We're mixing it up. We're taking the opportunity of having kind of an off year, like a non-in-person year, to do something a bit different. And yeah, it's pretty exciting actually. And you don't realize how, I certainly didn't realize how many people we have in the organization who are not just sort of quiet, introverted people. You've been to a Rubens, and there's plenty of cartoonists, as cartoonists often are, is very quiet, keeps themselves, very introverted. But then there's cartoonists who just happen to have these ridiculous skills that you didn't know about.
Yeah, try to get
acting and performance.
Yes, try to get Mike Peters out of his shell. I mean,
oh my gosh! Oh, it's so good to see you, Michael. Oh, that's so great. I love him. He is one of my favorite people.
I'm still decompressing from when I met him.
We're fellow St. Louisians, so I'm sorry you caught COVID there.
Yeah, well, I actually love St. Louis. That's why I was there. I love St. Louis. Yeah, it's. I'll go back. We're going back actually in June for a little summer, for a week in summer, so it'll be nice. Mike Peters is another example of someone who, until you see their cartoon, you see Mother Goose and Grimm, and you see, the work, but then you meet the person, and you're like, holy moly, this is amazing. Like there's so many cartoonists who are very quiet, like Jack Davis, the polite, oh, howdy, how are you? Oh, God bless you. Yeah, good to see you. And then their work is this amazing explosion of energy and color and line and just motion. And you meet the person and they're so quiet and reserved. Same with Mort, Drucker, all those guys were just so nice. And then you see their work and you're like, oh my God, look at this. It's crazy. You'd think they were doing it on a trampoline. Got so much energy.
That's good. So when is the Rubens?
We're looking at October 15th, the weekend of October 15th. Okay. It's the weekend after New York Comic Con, which fingers crossed, still happens at the Javits. There is a crossover this year that we're doing, which I can't say too much about just yet, but we're getting a lot more international talent involved and spreading it across 3 days instead of just doing 8 hours like we did last year. We're going to really, so that, because some people couldn't attend last year because they were like, well, I'm not around that day, so I'm not going to be able to see it. I'll have to watch the replay. But now if we spread it, we're spreading it across a few days so that we can sort of, more people can avail themselves of the show and of the conference sessions. And we're making it a bit more interactive, so it's not all pre-recorded. We're chatting about a lot of different topics and a lot of different skill sets. And it's going to be like nothing we've ever done before. And that sounds like a sales pitch. It's just, that's exactly what it is. It's like nothing we've ever tried before. So fingers crossed everything works.
Yeah, don't go Golden Globes.
Oh God, why would we?
So where's it being held?
Speaking of which, so we're doing it virtually, but we are going to do a concurrent, like a simultaneous. Again, hopefully, if there's no relapse of cases and things like that, at the Society of Illustrators in New York. But we're going to sort of, like I say, I'm so trepidatious about saying anything because every time I say something, another disaster happens and we have to replan things. So, you mentioned the Golden Globes. I think the last good Golden Globes was, the last memorable one, I guess, was when Ricky Gervais was hosting and he just slammed everyone, which was great. He had one of the best monologues he's ever had. So that's, if you say going the way of the Golden Globes, yeah, sure, that'd be nice. Going that way, yes. But not the way they've gone now. That's a bit, I think they ended on a high.
So
with him.
You don't have, I don't know. It's humor is such, there's a lot of trepidation now in humor. So it's almost like we need a reset, I think.
I wanted to ask you guys about this because, and is Marty allowed to chime in? Hi, Marty.
No.
Marty's here.
The answer is
not
no.
allowed.
I'm here.
Yes, of course
he's waving. But...
No, he's
because across comedy and my comic strip and gag cartoons and editorials, I am definitely finding that the audiences are laughing at different things, maybe, or people are less inclined to let themselves laugh. And one of the things I noticed in quarantine was that people really wanted to laugh. They just wanted some catharsis, right? But when you do Zoom comedy, everyone's camera is on, which is like putting a spotlight on the audience, and their microphone is on, which is like giving everyone in the audience a microphone. And then the comedian's trying to do their act, and meanwhile, everyone else has a spotlight and a microphone, and it just doesn't work. But the reason comedy works the way it does in a club is that the audience is in the dark, and you can't see them, and they can't see each other. They're more likely to laugh because they don't feel guilty for being looked at for laughing at certain things. Now it seems like everyone has their own personal brand, particularly on social media, and to be seen to be retweeting something or laughing at something or even finding something interesting just by association, if it's the wrong thing, if it's deemed the wrong thing, even retroactively, all of a sudden you're in serious trouble. You can get your whole career can be erased overnight. Are you finding this stuff?
Yes, it's funny because Bob was mentioning the resurrection of the Rejection collection, which
yes,
I had some cartoons on, and he was telling me this one is going to be reprinted, and I go like, okay, can I have my name taken off of it, please? But it'll either, stuff, and this is like 2004. So if it's like, I don't know. It's like it is a different time.
Which cartoon show was it? The cartoon that I just saw?
Yeah,
that was a great cartoon. You should be so proud.
What
of
was
that
the cartoon, Marty? What was
it was so ahead of its time. Was it Stop and I'll Shoot?
Yeah, it was this black guy running away from an officer of some sort, and the officer saying stop and I'll shoot.
It was stop.
That's
and
a great
also,
joke.
And I saw
That's
it
a solid joke.
recently. I saw it like in the past week, and I was like, wow, that's great. Thinking it was now.
Yeah.
And he was like, this is from 2004. And I was like, what?
Yeah.
This is like
Wiley Miller did
so.
that this week as well. He posted a cartoon strip from 20 years ago, which was about the same thing. And it was the fact that nothing has changed.
It really hasn't. I mean, it's
just gotten worse. It's gotten worse.
Yeah.
It
I don't know
amazing.
if it's gotten worse or it's just everything is now looked at and kind of put under, like you said, it's put under the Zoom microscope.
Yeah.
So you have no room for error.
Oh my God.
Jason, how do you think the comedy landscape has changed? I mean, I have my own theories of where this began, where
you do?
I'll just quickly say this confessional style where it's expected that as a stand-up or a cartoonist, you open up. And maybe that's even a priority over being funny, is that you are expected to share a part of you that's private. And there's a contradiction there too, because at the same time, people are not supposed to be sharing everything online that's considered bad form as well. But I feel like that's the place of comedy now, is where everyone is. It's more important to be confessional. And as someone who's playing both sides of the coin, what do you think?
It's an interesting thing because I'm constantly aware of anything that I put out being, digital permanence. Like, oh, what if I change my mind on something? Or what if the new information comes to light and something I thought or made a joke about 5 minutes ago, all of a sudden it's deemed as inappropriate or something. Which is why I think it's amazing that people are living their lives like an open wound many of the time, like much of the time with comedy and with autobiographical fiction and cartooning. I love a lot of the autobiographical cartoonists who really show their innermost thoughts and feelings and ideas and stuff, because the inner workings of a cartoonist's brain is kind of strange, and then getting a slice of what their day is kind of fun. I always like watching Emily Flake kind of draw what happens at her place. That's always great. But then there are those who you're like, I didn't need to know that. You're like, that one was a lot. But I think it's personal taste. I think some people really enjoy that stuff, and I think other people just don't. And as far as comedy goes, I think you're right that some people think by having watched a certain, whatever school of comedy they came up in, that confessional style of comedy where it's like your life on a plate, sometimes that can be hilariously funny. Some of the funniest comedians I've ever seen in my life, the Richie Pryors of the world, did that. They were Richie Pryor was probably the first to really open up and just no holds barred, just give you everything from his life, just completely honest. He set himself on fire. There's that, and then there's the other side where you realize, oh, Richie also wrote jokes in there. He also really he worked on that thing. He wasn't just coming up with it off the top of his head, even though it looks like it. That's half the job with comedy, is to make it look like you're just coming up with it. He worked so hard on those jokes in the same way that Jerry or anyone does, with the word economy and with when to put the certain operative word and all those bits of business in comedy writing. And I was hosting open mics in New York for years, probably years too long, because I just saw comic after comic after comic think that you just got up and started saying things that happened to you or just make things dirty, and then immediately think, oh, why aren't they laughing? Like, I'm just telling you, I'm living like an open wound here. And it's like, yeah, you got to write jokes though. I'm sort of deemed as a bit of a grumpy old man, not in comedy circles, but in the sense of like, I came up writing joke. I'm a big joke guy. Like, I love the mechanics of a joke. I like the word economy. I like the way it sounds, the rhythm. I like a lot of jokes per minute, a lot of laughs per minute. My set is, yes, it's about me, and there's things about me that I share that are jokes, but are also kind of funny. Marty, you've heard more than a few of them. The eggs joke comes to mind. But I also make sure that it's not just a Dear Diary entry, and that it's, hey, here's a funny thing that happened today, or here's me breaking down in front of you for your pleasure. Like, there is definitely something to someone getting on stage.
Yeah. Doesn't it take you like
in front of you?
5 years to get to your tight 20?
I think longer than 5. I think 7 at least to get 20.
7,
like a tight. Yeah, to get good at it, you can develop 20 in a year from beginning, from the start, and that'll get you, maybe some hosting gigs. Or
I've seen Malcolm Gladwell's stand up is not great. And he's worked on it for like
do 10,000.
Yeah, he's done about
10,000 more hours from Malcolm.
He's done about 7,000 hours, and you can tell.
Every 10,000 hours rule. What were we saying, Mark?
Every time I think I'm getting ill from having eggs, I think of you personally.
Now we have to hear that.
That's
joke.
all I want.
Like every time I'm like, maybe it was the eggs. It might be the eggs. When Jason has eggs, makes him sick. Maybe this is what Jason had.
Yeah.
Like I literally, you pop into my head in a terrible time when I'm like, ooh, Jason Chatfield. I should have listened. I should have listened to Jason.
When there's grumbling in your tummy, that's when you think of me. It's the Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson of foods. It's in everything. You remember this. And anyone who orders couscous now or sees couscous on a menu, I get texts going, like, even just people snapping menus and going, look at the couscous. That's all very strange, having not heard the set. But I was a big Mad magazine fan growing up, so my humor was kind of sick to begin with. So when I started doing stand-up, and my immediate sort of reflexive thing to make something funny was to kind of go a little bit, grim, dirty, silly.
And boy, what a void that Mad left. It's amazing. I mean, everything has changed so much in the last 4 years in the magazine.
Yeah.
For gag cartooning. And you were talking about not always having to be funny in the rooms. I mean, there are rooms, especially now for comedy, that are not really. There's certain rooms that are notorious for being sort of heavy-handed and highbrow. And do you play those rooms at all, or? I
don't think they'll have me. I don't. You're quite right. Comedy used to be this, particularly in New York, if you had a good act and you had some decent credits and you had some runs on the board and you could make your crowd laugh, you could pretty much play any club in the city. You could run from club to club on any given night. But there's definitely been a fracturing of the tone and style of comedy within the scene. So, and I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing. I was lamenting it when it started to happen, but I actually can see the good in it now, is that not everyone wants to see the same kind of stuff, and comedy is subjective. There's certain elemental things that are always funny, but if you go to a club and you know that you're going to hear the kind of comedy that you like, you're more likely to go back to that club and invite your friends. Whereas if you show up at a club and you hear a lot of stuff that you don't really connect with, it's sort of like you're going to conflate every comedy club with that experience. So sometimes it's better if some clubs have a certain bent and than others. A lot of Brooklyn rooms and a lot of rooms around the place kind of have, as you say, some more, I guess, a different tone. And then, other clubs, a different tone again. It's as different as Mad was from the New Yorker. It's just like being published in a different magazine these days. Different clubs want different kinds of acts. Yeah, I remember Nick Meglin years ago, the late Nick Meglin, talking about jokes, and it stuck with me. This is back in, I think, maybe Boston, or this is at a Rubens. It was maybe in LA or Boston or something. And it stuck with me where he said, sometimes, because he was a volume guy, right? So he would just pitch joke after joke after joke, volume until something hit. and he said, people have different sensibilities with comedy, but the most honest thing you can do is just try and make yourself laugh. And I think that was really good advice, because it changed the way I wrote. I stopped trying to make things, like write jokes that people would hear and then go, "Oh, he's clever," like stop trying to write jokes for the audience and try and be cloying and try and, cater to them. Instead, I'd be like, well, what do I think's funny? What do I crack up laughing at? And then, write jokes about that stuff. And if you write for yourself, you'll find a critical mass of people who end up laughing at the same stuff. And that always stuck with me. He was always good like that. He always had little nuggets of genius Nick Meglin.
That's what everyone always says too. You hear this a lot from the old time cartoonists. Sam Gross always says, just try to make yourself laugh. But Jason, who makes you laugh? Well, name maybe a cartoonist. Who's your favorite cartoonist? You don't have to name someone who's living, because we don't want to pick favorites, but maybe someone who's in the old days. And
come on, Bob, you call this living?
Yeah.
Who's your favorite dead cartoonist?
Yeah, that's what we're getting at. We're trying to say it nicely.
Favorite dead cartoonist?
Yes.
Wow.
Or they could be sick.
Richard Thompson.
Someone not doing well.
It depends. Like, I think, different disciplines again. I think Richard Thompson is my favorite.
Sure.
A dead cartoonist. I think he was a genius. I think Ronald Searle as well. I think was probably one of the great, wow, incredible.
He's like a
cartoonist.
These are illustrators.
Yeah, these are illustrators. These are great craftsmen.
Yeah, but they're cartoonists. I mean, there's a difference between an illustrator and a cartoonist in that they wrote their own stuff and they had a voice and they had a real view, like a lens on the world that was just so unique to them. Like, you couldn't give them a brief and go, hey, draw this like this. Richard Thompson's going to draw Beethoven like Richard Thompson draws Beethoven. You know what I mean? Like, it's going to be, you're going to give it to them and you're going to get back what they see. Same with Searle. I like Stedman. He's alive. I think
we'll give you a live one.
Yeah. Well, honestly,
at least he's old.
Actually makes me properly laugh out loud. Funny. I laugh all the time at Ed Steed. I think Ed Steed's hilarious. He's just an absurd, just crazy. His stuff is ridiculous. Obviously, like high up. Who makes me laugh as far as like cartooniness is Sergio Aragonés has to be my favorite living cartoon.
He can do more in the least amount of space that I've ever seen. It's pretty amazing. What comic strips did you look at growing up?
I was a big Calvin and Hobbes fan. I was always a big reader of Calvin and Hobbes. And in my local paper, I only had Ginger Meg's, Calvin and Hobbes, and Garfield. So I didn't have much of a selection. But I used to buy collections of the books and of the comic strips. So I was a big Watterson fan. Yeah. I have a Watterson on the wall over here.
Uh-oh. Is it signed?
It is.
Uh-oh. Hold on to it. Don't give anyone your address.
The syndicate gave it to me as a gift because he's also with Andrews McNeil.
He's a bit reclusive, I understand.
The most reclusive, indeed.
I know. I actually met him at Ohio State University when I was at university, and he gave a large lecture on how the comic industry sucked and was going to get worse, and he was right.
I read that lecture. Sorry, go on.
I was going to say he was tonight's guest until he backed out and we got you.
You wish.
I thought you were going to. Where's he would be? Well, now Gary Larson has resuscitated his career. Is he back?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he's back. He's doing Fireside. He's working digitally now, which he didn't realize how far the digital technology had come since he started trying to work digitally back in the early 2000s, late 90s. And he's back.
Yeah, it's like he's climbed out of the dryer and he's ready to go again.
Yeah, he was always one of those ones those elusive, and talk about reclusive. One of those sort of elusive cartoonists that I was like, this guy. Very often, Scott and I will, at least once per episode, will come up with an idea and look at each other and go, I think Gary Larson did that one. Usually a talking animal.
But... It was like Larson and Watterson, yeah. They sort of defined comic strips for about 20 years. Him and Berkeley Breathed and a few other people.
What about Peanuts?
Yeah, Opus. Yeah, Schultz. I mean,
as Mort Walker used to say, like E.C. Segar, the inventor of the creator of Popeye.
Segar,
was King's Features' favorite artist, cartoonist, mainly because he was dead, and they could do whatever they wanted.
That's funny.
Yeah,
and they're still doing it today.
Charles Schultz, he's still out there somewhere producing these.
Jeannie Schultz, honestly, Jeannie is one of the best. Speaking of people and I say this doing a legacy strip, Jeannie Schultz is probably one of the best caretakers of a legacy that I've ever seen, especially in comic strips. She is awesome. I really like Jeannie.
Wow. All right. Good shout.
Yeah, she does a lot of work. She does a lot of work that nobody sees.
Yeah, it's amazing just to keep a comic strip going and not kind of go in weird directions, even if it's just being reprinted, is probably a pretty full-time occupation.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because just recently Tarzan finished up, and that was in reruns for a long time, but it just really didn't mesh with the times anymore. And
I really enjoy a good Phantom.
Yeah, I like Phantom. I always like Lee Falk.
It was one of those
interesting.
He's always got that pistol.
The two pistols and his stripy underwear. I don't know why it was stripy.
His dog Devil.
I used to read Kit Walker and his cave, his skull cave. I used to read those comics when I was a kid, because I remember being in hospital. I had my appendix out, and my dad just brought me this giant stack of Phantom comics, and I just devoured them. I had nothing else. There was no TV in the hotel room, in the hospital room. Bob, you mentioned just before how much the magazine industry's changed. You were working for Mad, for the new Mad, but you had done stuff for the old Mad, right?
Correct.
Yeah, so you were a New York Mad contributor and an LA Mad contributor, right? And they are different beasts.
Yeah. And you know what? The LA group did their best, but the circumstances were so extreme and stuff. I mean, you just can't expect to change everyone on a masthead and be able to produce the same thing. So
absolutely.
I mean, everything about the business is just so different. It's just amazing how we've seen everything change. And then you look at it this way. I mean, for most of civilization, man did not have printed word. I mean, we discovered how to make the printing press in the 15th century. And here we are, we're seeing it sort of slowly disappear. And that's actually happening pretty quickly. It's been like a blip in history that we're losing the printed manner.
Yeah, it's
now
weird.
I'm all sad, Bob. God.
I was looking at they had Da Vinci's journals that he used to keep, and they posted them online recently. Usually you used to have to go to the British Museum to see them, or the Louvre, or wherever they were kept, Met, or there were bits and pieces everywhere. But I remember just reading them and going, well, these survive. These will transcend the printing press, the internet, all these things, just handwritten stuff. It's not printed on newsprint that will, it's not gossamer. It's a real thing that will transcend generations. But the notion of the printing press just being a blip in our civilization in the grand scheme of things. I was watching a 2009 film called State of Play with Russell Crowe, another Australian. And he was a journalist, one of these real hack journalists, one of these real gritty, I live on whiskey and newsprint. And I was watching it, and the whole, at the very end of the film, the credits roll over a sequence of a newspaper being printed, from the bromides through to the plates, through to the actual the press itself, and then the pre-press stuff, as well as the the stitch and the fold and all that stuff. And I remember watching it because I used to work in newspapers. That was my first job as a teenager, was working in newspapers. And I remember the smell of it. Like I was watching the screen and I could smell the ink and I could smell the paper, and it was this weird, somnosomatic memory. I could just smell a thing that I could see. And I remember thinking, oh, there's a generation of cartoonists now and illustrators and artists who will just never get to know that feeling of drawing a cartoon like a minute before deadline, turning it in, and then it going to press, and then feeling the building wobble, like as the presses would sort of wind up in the basement, and then seeing the paper, the first papers come in at like 4 a.m. and flipping through and just like, and seeing, oh, great, that's the thing I just submitted, and now it's in print in my hands. It's an indelible memory I have from my first published like editorial cartoon in like 2003, I think. And it's just that there's an entire generation will never have that.
It's funny. Yeah. I really don't enjoy looking at too many comic strips at one time, because you used to look at one a day.
Yeah.
Because you got the paper.
That's on purpose.
And then you'd open it up, and it's like a baseball player. If they're hitting 1 out of 3, you're hitting 300. You're like, okay. Handicap, okay. Fell in the canal, okay. Dagwood's making a sandwich. So they weren't really, really funny, but they were very consistent and mildly amusing, because, Dagwood was going to go take a nap, and Andy was going to bop flow on. So.
Right. But it would reset. Like there was no canon where it was like, oh, we have to carry this on for years afterwards. Like it was meant to be escapism from the horrendousness of the newspaper. Like, there's another bombing in Gaza, and then you flip to the comics page, and some people just start with the comics page or the obits, because it's an escape from the misery of the rest of the editorial sections. And it didn't have to be hilarious. It could just be respite.
No, and you didn't, you didn't expect hilarity.
Yeah, sometimes it would be funny, really funny. Once in a while, though.
No, like BC was very consistent in being quirky funny in a way that I found unusual for comic strips.
This is Jason's
Bob, Michael, what are your favorites?
Jason, this is Michael's way of saying you're doing the Lord's work.
You are doing the Lord's work. No, it's funny because I tried to get syndicated, and I good Lord, it was like the hardest thing on earth. It's
tough. Yeah,
it is tough. And it's funny. At one time, Peanuts was syndicated to 2,000 newspapers. And I don't even think there's 2,000 newspapers left on earth now.
I mean, I remember Jim Borgman saying at one point when he and Jerry Scott were doing Zits, they still are, but this was when Borgman was at the Cincy Inquirer back,
right?
Maybe when you were there. And I remember him saying something about, oh, we just hit 2,000 papers or something. This is a while back, like a long time ago. And I remember thinking, I can't even picture 2,000 different newspapers in my head. I was from Australia. We have 5 newspapers, and they're all owned by Rupert Murdoch. So It's like a weird concept for something to be syndicated that widely to me. So when he was saying that, I just couldn't fathom the scale of it. And now we're back to, it being pretty amazing if you're in a 100 or 200, if you're starting out, that's pretty good numbers.
Yeah, Jason, how much longer do you think you're going to be doing Ginger? Another 100 years or?
Yeah, I think I'll try it for another 100 and see where we end up. It's funny because we have readers who read him online now because he's on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook automatically. They post every day. And people just think there's people who think it's a webcomic. They don't know it's a 100-year-old newspaper comic strip.
That's true. So, don't you have a 80-year-old avid follower?
Oh, yeah. We've got quite a few of those. The comment section's always very lively. I remember in my day, we never used to play cricket like that. It was a weird thing when I took it over to get feedback, because you used to have to get letters from the newspaper sent over to you. Like if they sent a letter to the paper, the paper would have to share it with you for you to get feedback from the reader. And often they couldn't be bothered. They're just like, screw it, just throw that one out. But now you get it immediately. You get comments under every single one, and everyone has their say on the comic of the day. And certain readers like know each other, and they sort of had their own little in jokes. And then there's other people who are like complain about the same thing.
There was another thing that editors really did not like animal cartoon strips, because when they canceled them, they had a very high squeal factor in that they would have very small but avid followers who would be just mortally wounded if their comic strip was dropped.
I mean, Peanuts, Pills Before Swine, Garfield. I think it was Schultz who told Jim Davis, here's some comic trivia that probably everyone knows. It was Schultz who told Jim Davis to make Garfield walk on 2 feet instead of 4.
Oh, really?
And that was a pretty big jump. And Garfield is the most syndicated strip in the world now.
And
I'm not saying it's because of that one thing, but it certainly helped.
No, and Feature Cat Lasagna.
Oh yeah, the lasagna thing. Oh boy,
I'm so full.
You can see actually if you go to ncsfest.com, Jim actually gave a nice talk about humor and jokes and writing Garfield and why he does what he does and how he does it. It's about, I want to say it's like 40 minutes long, but yeah, if you go to ncsfest.com, I got to interview him. I say interview him. I teed him up for a talk last year and just basically hit record. And it was interesting to see he went to college with David Letterman. He was at Ball State. And one of them ended up, they both wanted to be stand-up comedians, and only one of them ended up making a career of it.
And I'm thinking he might be wealthier than Letterman at this point.
Who knows? Yes. Did you see, I heard he sold Paws Inc. or something. He sold Garfield recently. I don't know what the number was, but it's got to be stratospheric.
Huh. Yeah. Jason, I'm concerned about your time. We did go over the 40-minute limit.
We were just blocked out. Wait, we went from orange to purple. It's time to go.
Yeah, and I know with your schedule. I mean, what are you doing later? Are you writing a screenplay or doing a musical? What you're
both
on
at the same time. I think I mentioned earlier that right after this, Scott and I are getting together for the first time in a long time to discuss getting the band back together. We're actually going to a comedy show tonight, but at the same time, we are working on bringing Is There Something in This back to the podcast world. So It's It Podcast.
Let's hope there was something in this to bring back to our podcast world too.
This is fun. I could talk with you guys all day. This has been really fun.
No, thank you. It's been great to have you. You're like the Da Vinci. You are Da Vinci of these modern times, doing everything. I actually did a piece for Smithsonian Institute, Da Vinci wedding planner, because he once was also a wedding planner, and I'm thinking, you are Da Vinci with all the different hats you wear. It's pretty amazing. Have you planned any weddings?
I planned my own. In fact, that's a lie. I didn't. My wife planned ours in her lunch break one time. We didn't really have a wedding so much as just a big party at a cigar bar. She walked in her lunch break to a cigar lounge, said, hey, we're going to have a small wedding with just some friends and family. What's your menu like? And are you available on this date? Wow. They went, yes. She said, here's the deposit. Wedding planned. She did it in under 20 minutes.
Luckily, she smokes cigars.
Yeah, we used to smoke cigars back then. We don't really do that anymore.
Well, that's wonderful, though. That's the way to do it.
Yeah, we didn't have any tape.
Come on, draw comic strips, smoke cigars. That's classic old school.
That's very Mel Lazarus of me. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, Jason, where can we see your work? Where can we get the book? Give us a little bit of info.
Sure. Well, you can see my work. Just jasonchatfield.com is probably the best place to go because everything's there. The book is at gingermegs.com, and there's an international order link there now. And yeah, you mentioned earlier that I sort of post things about, like, I'm a big process junkie. I'm interested in how artists work and the process behind, creating stuff. So I always post on my blog about, little tips and stuff that I learn and try and share it if it helps other cartoonists. So that's just jasonchatfield.com/blog.
Great.
You made Bob stop asking where your ideas come from. So that's the question. The question that is never asked. It's just implied.
The bath is the answer.
The bath. That's good. Doesn't the water get cool? I would kind of like. Ugh.
Well, keep topping it up. You got to keep topping it up. You just pull the plug and keep topping it up with water.
And you don't get too pruny.
Well, no, you got to keep drinking water, and also once in a while have a little glass of scotch. But yeah, it's good.
Is there any chance I could be invited?
It's a one-man show.
That's what got you in trouble.
Sorry. Even my wife isn't invited.
Oh.
All right. Well, it's been great having you here. You look great. I look forward to seeing you on.
I got you. Thank you. You guys are amazing. I'm enjoying the show, by the way. For what it's worth, I listen to the show and I enjoy it very much. You're a good gang, and your guests are incredible.
We want you to listen to it in the bath. Or in the bar. Watching
not
you play enough.
Yeah, thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
All
right. Hope to see you soon in person.
You take care of yourself.
Yeah. You too. Cheers, Bob. Cheers, Michael.
Cheers.
Thanks, Marty.
Okay. And Michael, what did you think of Jason? Wasn't that fun?
The guy is a Renaissance fellow.
I don't know how he finds the hours in the day.
He must have a day extender or some sort of device. Or there's more than one of them.
Yeah, I would have wanted to hear more about his upbringing in Australia, because I always hear these tall tales of like how rugged it is and how extreme everything is in the outback.
I think he's actually from St. Louis, and that's all made up. That's my theory.
That's why. Yeah, that's why we didn't divulge more. But we'll bring him back next time. We'll dig deeper.
Let's get to the bottom of this.
Exactly. Well, Michael, it's good to see you.
Good to hear you.
So thanks, everyone. To all the cartoon lovers, cartoonists, stay well, stay funny, stay 6 feet back.